Well, why don't we do that now, Mom? Why don't you tell me the name of your mother and your father and where they were born, if you know.
Yes. My mother was born in um, Ac- uh, my mother was born in LaGrange,
Mm-hmm.
and so many people worked then. I have it all written down, but I really can't. Not sure I can remember it right now. But she was born in LaGrange, Georgia,
Uh-huh.
and then they moved to Decatur, Alabama. My father worked for I think it was Louisville and that, anyway, I worked for a railroad. I have it written down. Because railroads were big then, like
Right.
airline travel is now. And so I guess they met because he worked in LaGrange well, anyway, they moved to Decatur, Alabama. And that may be where Mom and Dad, my mother and father met. But anyway, they were married. I think they were married there, but to tell you the truth, I would have to get my genealogy out for you to record. I mean, Clint, why don't you bring a chair off the carport? One of these chairs, they're on the carport.
Do you remember your mother's full name?
My mother's name was Cowan, and she didn't. It was Julia Cowan Palmer. Cowan was and she had two sisters, my Aunt Annie and my Aunt Ruth.
Uh-huh.
And
what was your
I think there were some brothers. I have to. I just enjoyed working on the genealogy, but something happened that I got away from it.
Yeah.
I think when Dad was sick.
Yeah. What was your father's full name?
His name was Victor Jerome Palmer, and my mother was Julia Calvin Palmer. She didn't know.
Where was your dad born?
For her.
Where was your father born?
He was born in what county is it? I think it's Troop. Northern Troop County is LaGrange. He was born in East Georgia. What is the name of that town? It's a town that's just a wide spot in the road, a rural area. I mean, the last time I saw it, it was just a rural area. Yeah. That's not accurate over there. What is it? Well, if I had the book that I have in there, I could show you everything. But I have his sisters and brothers and everybody written down. And I have one picture that it's an old picture, it's like a postcard, that has my brothers and sisters in it. And because I had a sister named Mildred who died when she was 12 years old of diabetes.
Oh, really?
You know, there was no cure for diabetes back in those days. I mean, there was no medication to control it. I don't know that you ever cured it, but there was no medication to control it. And she died when she was in her early teens. But, and then I had one brother, Richard, was in the Merchant Marine. And so
what were
he
your
died
brothers
while
and
he was
sisters?
in that service.
What were your brothers and sisters' names? Could you name them all?
What, my brothers and sisters?
Yeah.
Well, my sisters, I had a sister named Mildred, and I had and my sister Ruth. Ruth and Steve, you know, lived in South Carolina. And that's well, their two sons, Philip and Steve Jr. were born. But Steve was, you know, all my family grew up during the Depression was in the years that they were growing up. And Steve worked for newspapers in different places like Charlotte, North Carolina, and things like that, and places like that. And I don't know whether the newspapers failed and he lost his job, or he just decided he wanted to go. Steve decided he wanted to go back to where he grew up in South Carolina.
Anderson, South
Carolina. And he was really a tobacco farmer. And they had some 2 or 3 cabins on the property that the workers lived in. People that worked on the farm lived in there. And my father had several sisters. My mother had, well, she had some brothers too. But I worked with it so long and went down to the archives and so forth, and really had it pretty, I had it in my mind because I was working on it. But if ever I can, if I have the book in front of me, I can tell you who those people.
Do you know where the book is?
And over there, and no, it's not. I can't think of it. It's Columbia County, but there's some county seat that's near where my father's family lived. The Columbia County is over toward Augusta. And, my mother's family lived in Decatur, Alabama, and my father worked for the railroad, and L&N Railroad. Anyway, she and he were married in Decatur, and I may still have some cousins in Decatur, but my Aunt Ruth and Uncle Ben continued to live in Decatur, but after my father and mother married, anyway, they moved to Atlanta.
So you were born in Atlanta?
I was born in Atlanta, I'm not sure whether some of my brothers or sisters, they were probably born other places. I just don't have it in front of me. But I could find immediate family in that book. But it was Victor Jerome Sr., and they called him Jack. And he was born in 1871, and he and my mother were married in 1897 in New Decatur, Morgan County, Alabama. And they're buried in Hollywood Cemetery.
Where's Hollywood Cemetery?
It's out...
it's in Atlanta, isn't it?
It's out on the south side of Atlanta, out toward West End and out that way.
Okay.
And it's in terrible shape because the part, and I haven't gotten to go out there. Well, Dad and I were going to fix it up, but there are graves right next to the Palmers that have caved in.
Okay.
See, it has no perpetual care. You have to pay for profession. I wish I had paid for care. But anyway, these are the children of my parents. Robert, Shay.
Speak up just a little bit. Who was the
Mildred,
person?
Robert, Mildred, Richard, Annie Ruth, Victor, Jerome Jr., and Paul R. Palmer, Myrtis Palmer, and Harold Little. So that's my immediate.
They had a lot of children. Let me take a look at that. So you had a brother, Robert, sister, Mildred. Robert was born in 1898, Mildred in 1900, Richard was born in 1902, Annie Ruth was born...
That's my Aunt Ruth up in
Aunt
South
Ruth
Carolina.
lived in South Carolina.
She hated that name, and she changed her name to Ruth Elizabeth.
Oh, she did?
I mean, that's what she called herself.
Well, let's see, it says where they were born, too. Robert Shea was born in New Decatur, Alabama. Mildred was born in New Decatur, Alabama. Richard, it doesn't say where he was born. Ruth was born in Atlanta. And Victor Jerome was born in Atlanta. And Paul was born in Atlanta.
Myrtis was born.
And you were born in Atlanta. Okay. And which of your brothers and sisters do you remember from when you were a child? I know some of them may have passed when you were young.
Yeah.
Which ones do you remember?
I remember I think it was Robert that when I was, in high school or younger, that had a stroke, and I remember him. I remember Richard, he was in the Merchant Marine. He had been married, but he was separated from his family, and let's see which ones I remember.
Well, Ruth, we spent a lot of time with Ruth.
And, of course, Ruth and Steve, and she was named Annie Ruth, but she didn't like it. Victor Jerome Palmer Jr. was never married. That's Paul.
Do you remember Victor? Victor? Do you remember him? He was born closer to you.
I think I did. Unmarried. I think I remember Victor. Let me see when he died. It says a question mark, 1930.
Speak up just a little bit.
I said, it says he unmarried,
Uh-huh.
and it says that he died in 1930. He was born in 1970.
So you would have only been...
There's a question mark behind 1930.
Yeah, well, you would have only been 7 years old when he died. And then Paul, tell me about Paul, because Paul was important in your life. He raised you for part of your life.
Yeah. Well, the one reason he is my father moved to South Carolina to work. Moved just everything the family had up there. And I don't know, I wasn't doing so well.
Well, was it during the Depression?
Yeah, it was during the Depression. And my mother just hated it. And she and I went to visit Ruth and Steve in Charlotte. And Mother did not go back to live with my father again. And Paul says, well, Mother, he was working. You all come to Atlanta and we'll get along the best we can if you don't want to go back. She was very unhappy. So, and I can remember her being unhappy, and I can remember how sad I was because she was so upset. But, so, we came back to Atlanta, and Steve, it was the Depression, and he lost his job with a newspaper in Charlotte, and he and my sister Ruth came to Atlanta, and we all moved in the house on Highland Terrace because where our mother and I lived, and Paul, but not big enough for everybody. And Steve got a newspaper job with the Atlanta Journal. But he was from South Carolina, and he always wanted to go back there. And he went back and became a farmer like he had been.